My guest today is Morgan Snyder, founder of Become Good Soil and author of Becoming a King. Morgan has spent decades helping men recover the ancient path of masculine initiation and life with God. What does it mean for a man to become truly mature? Not just older, not just more successful, not just more spiritual sounding. In this conversation, Morgan and I explore masculine initiation, belovedness, spiritual warfare, the second half of life, and the long journey of becoming a wholehearted man. If there are places in you that still feel young, unfinished, or unfathered and uninitiated, this conversation is an invitation to bring those pieces to God. Isn't it interesting that the deepest truths are often discovered on a journey? Every man is searching for something, a truer life, a deeper story, a closer walk with God, for a clearer sense of meaning and purpose. The King's Row is a gathering place for conversations that help us recover what matters most, our true identity, our amazing purpose, and the wild journey and life that Jesus is inviting us into. Welcome to the King's Row. Welcome to the King's Row. If you've joining us for this episode and you aren't aware, this is actually Morgan Snyder and I are going to drop into part two of a conversation that we had. So you'll want to go grab part one. Morgan Snyder is a friend of 25 years, a brother in the kingdom, and somebody I've got to stand with in several different initiatives, environments where we have been fortunate to stand shoulder to shoulder, moving toward men and inviting them to a way of a kingdom life that is has to be. I've heard you say it before, Morgan. It has to be found. It
Mm.
The gospel has to be found. You've said by every generation, this kingdom masculinity has to be found, and I love as we look and have looked for years how God brings it to us in our looking, in our search, and often not what I thought I was looking for,
Mm.
not what I thought I needed, and so it's been an amazing privilege to be not only a teammate of yours in the kingdom in some different environments, but even at large, a teammate of yours in the kingdom as we continue our masculine journeys and also um, move to create environments that others, men, women, marriages can discover this. You called it the ancient path, right? It's
Yes.
still relevant. It's still significant. So I'm so glad to have you for this part two, Morgan. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's such an honor. I can feel it in my body. Just, I'm so deeply moved. You know, how rare it is to be able to share life, conversation, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat with a like-hearted brother that has consented to the deep work of masculine initiation for 3 decades. Like,
Mhm.
where do you find that? You know, and so I notice in my heart, I'm very excited for this part 2, and I lead these 8-man epic mountain bike packing trips. We go from, Durango, Colorado to Moab, Utah, and what I love about it is so many of the things we've done over these years are big and public and stage, and
Yeah,
in that context,
yeah,
I get 7 days with 8 men, and we get the long version,
that's a different
right? We
ride.
get
Yep.
we step into a mode where we get the backstory. We get to have silence in between those poignant moments. There's a rhythm to it, and I notice in my heart, I wish we were on that sort of trip
Hmm.
to talk about these holy things. And yet, I believe that God is in this podcast, and this gives us the opportunity to connect all around the world with like-hearted men that are seeking to respond to God in his fathering pursuit to invite us into ever deeper masculine initiation. So
Mm.
this matters, and it's holy, and I'm really honored to share it with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. We wrapped part one and kind of we landed on the carrier, right?
Yes.
And
That's a good
now
description.
the refuel, and we're back off. And I mentioned as we wrapped up part one, I if we could just turn our attention a little bit to the spiritual warfare, and I would mention as we look into that a little bit. Morgan, this I have a different story. I grew up in the church. You mentioned in part one that you came in to your relationship with Christ at Vanderbilt in college, and it was significant.
Mhm.
Well, growing up, from the nursery, I mean, there's just a lot of years and a lot of membership pins and a lot of attendance
Mm,
pins, over the years with church and good, foundational in a lot of ways. Thankful for the many, 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 many exposures to sermons and scriptures and Bible studies and things like that. But one thing that was pretty light, if not absent, in my experience growing up, my masculine journey, and not until I really intersected with John and Wild at Heart, but even more so with Waking the Dead, and
mhm.
and when that early 2000s. But spiritual warfare was just not. I knew it existed. I did not know how it worked, and I didn't know what it really was like. It just wasn't talked about from pulpit
Right.
or Bible studies, and I think it's been. I probably have had my season or years where I was probably more hyper about the spiritual warfare spaces, the demonic, the foul spirits, and yet because I hadn't had much at all, of course you're going to swing to. I'm not even sure the word is extreme, but because
Yes.
I didn't have a lot of training or exposure to that, and
Right.
I feel like the naivety and ignorance that I had in that particular area had a profound impact on stunt
Mm,
my my growth. We talked about being 12, at or 11 or 12 at the table at John's in the Home Depot, and these uninitiated and unfathered spaces, and yet, yeah, I had no category for the kingdom of darkness and how all that worked. And I would like to just bring that into this conversation about the masculine journey. What has been your experience for men like me at that time who there's naivety, there's ignorance, there's not really even necessarily a fault of their own. Maybe they're church going men, and it's just not a part of the their understanding of the landscape, not only externally but even internally. What do you think how have you experienced the cause and effect of some of that?
yeah, it's an essential category to begin exploring, really excavating, what do we believe and what are the implications of that belief system? How is it being operationalized? And I love Dallas Willard, brilliant,
Yeah, I love Dallas.
mentor in our
Mhm.
space, and he says reality is what you bump into when you're wrong. I think it's
Mm.
super helpful. I ran into a glass wall carrying a couch probably 20 years ago, and all my body weight came on the tip of my nose. I did not know it was there, but I found out really quick when I was passed out on the ground. I looked like a raccoon for a week
Oh.
and I have a deviated septum because of it. And I bumped into reality, like it or not, right?
Mm,
This is one of those challenging categories because we are spiritual beings embodied, right? We are eternal souls, as Dallas Willard says, and then his, contemporary John Ortberg says, it's not that we have a soul, it's that we are a soul.
also, yeah,
And that matters,
right,
that everything that is real is actually spiritual. In other words, everything's being animated by a supernatural power, either of light or dark. And so, if that's true, how do we come to this category of spiritual warfare? And what I would name, Michael, is this is a podcast for the mature. And again, like we talked about in episode one, it can be a caricature, it can be mishandled, it can be over or under emphasized, it can cause great damage. And ultimately, the goal in all of it is never spiritual warfare.
right.
The goal is deeper union
Intimacy, right? Union,
and intimacy,
intimacy,
right?
right, right.
Union and intimacy. And so there's a quote from C.S. Lewis in Screwtape Letters, a brilliant read on spiritual warfare, where he says the two equal and opposite errors with humanity about evil is one is to disbelieve the existence
Yeah,
of spiritual fallen beings, to disbelieve that spiritual warfare is at play. And the other is to believe and feel an excessive and unhealthy interest. And so I think what's important to name for each of us, I believe confidently that every one of us has a bias. And bias is both good and bad, but we all have a bias, a leaning as it relates to the category of spiritual warfare. Many people come from your background, my background, that we were painfully naive to it. Other people overemphasize it.
mm,
And so my question to our listeners is, where do you find yourself now? Because
mhm,
both are dangerous. To not give it the sober consideration that it deserves, as you talk about in King Me and the larger story. And we've learned that through John Eldridge and Fulton Sheen and Baxter Kruger. There's so many
right,
sources that teach us that we're born into a story, that angels and demons were in the earth before humans entered the scene. But if we don't treat it with the sobriety in which it deserves, then not only is it unbiblical, but we're unprotected.
right.
And then here's the key, it becomes misappropriated. And so when something bad happens, who did it? It's either me, God, or someone else. And if you just take that out to its logical terms, conscious or unconscious, when there is evil in the world, if it's not spiritual darkness, then it must be sourced in God, me, or someone else. And you think of the implications of that.
Right.
And then the other extreme is if it's too much, that idea of like a demon under every rock. The problem is we miss the point because our authority is overemphasized and we miss the point of formation
Mm,
to greater union,
mhm,
greater intimacy.
mm,
And we lose this idea, as it relates to spiritual warfare, one of my most helpful sort of phrases is what we focus on grows.
yeah,
What has our attention grows,
yeah,
right? That's why Eugene Peterson said, I I gazed upon the beauty of God, like it says in the Psalms, that I behold God beholding me. We become what we behold. So I take spiritual warfare very seriously, very soberly, but I do not want to overemphasize,
yeah,
and I do not want to give the enemy an uh, unearned attention where my focus is on evil. And when we get into this, it's a big theological or a prevenient grace, but what it really means is it starts with God, that God exists, that God is in control, that it begins with God, and our movement to God is simply a response
yeah,
to God's initiative. And so I don't want to overemphasize it. And so,
right.
in that space, how do I walk in my initiation as a man in a way that takes evil seriously and soberly, and allows it to be part of my training as a warrior,
Yeah.
part of my ruling as a king, and out of my becoming in my integration. And how do I also not overemphasize it where my role in the story becomes central and it ends up being about my efforts rather than me ultimately being rooted in I am perfectly safe because I live and breathe in God. And God stands as the authority above all of it.
Yeah.
And so I just want to name those two dangers and
Right.
how we operate with that. And ultimately, the goal is to become like Christ, where it says in John, there's this beautiful passage that gets overlooked. But in John 14, it says the enemy came against Christ, but it said, but there was no, he had no hold in Christ.
Yeah.
He had no power over
Yeah.
Christ. There was no access point in
Yeah.
Christ.
Yeah.
And so what I just want to name is there is a process. There warfare is essential. There's spiritual strongholds, generational curses, agreements, all forms of biblical manifestations of evil, and we must deal with it. But the goal, the warfare is never the point. The goal is
Yeah.
our deeper maturation in union.
Yeah. 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 Um, the when I as I was listening, I think about what the warfare is about,
Yes.
and you summed it up in your last statement. If this is what we're made for, intimacy and union, then the warfare is predominantly it is about opposing that.
Right.
And
Right.
I think Morgan, when I came to discover more of not just what warfare is, but again how it works. We talk about agreement. I mean, John taught about vows and agreements, and the weightiness, the power of those things in the image bearer's life. And if you believe a lie, and Satan, Jesus called him the father of lies. If you believe a lie, then it has power. Your belief is a part of what is transpiring. How all that works percentage wise, I'm not sure. I'm the guy to ask. But at the same time, this is the um, this is a component, and I like what you called it. It's a part of it,
Yes.
and to understand how it works, understand how it's been working in you, and wants to work through you. I go back to our old 19, what is it, 97, 98 matrix, right? And how the enemy can use people, right? So just at your earliest thoughts as you were talking in this episode, right? If the enemy's not there, then it's a very limited response. Who's responsible, right, for
Absolutely.
this? And yet there's this, we'll call it this other kingdom of darkness, fallen angels, and just to have some categories that you were speaking to, I think is extremely helpful. And I know that for me, when you discover something new, it's what you pull out of your pocket and show all your friends.
Oh, right.
you know
Give the boy a hammer,
yes.
the
And
whole
so
world is a nail.
there was a time when that was just a very, very significant, weighty um, deliverance is real, and yet, to your point of C.S. Lewis, I think there was a season in my 40s where, yeah, pretty much if you gave me a microphone, that's what I'm going to talk about.
Of
Um,
course.
and
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 you came to that honestly
yes,
as a reaction to your
right,
formation, right?
exactly,
For that season, that was reasonable,
yeah.
and I can appreciate that.
Yeah, and then have found, a better place of the tensions of for me and Robin, our family, our marriage, to know that, as John said back in the early days of Epic. You remember Epic? I mean, we live
Yes, I sure
in the
do.
greatest love story set in the midst of the fiercest battle. I just heard it the other day again on the Pause app. I mean, he has not changed. He
Right.
said that. Has he changed? Yes. I've watched John's journey, and as he learned, has he evolved, has he matured, and that has been, I think part of this. I remember when being a beloved son was discovery.
Right.
And if you gave me a mic, that is what I
Absolutely.
wanted to talk about, is receiving the love of God. Are
Yes.
you experiencing the love of God, or is it a theory or a theology? Is it something that is tangible and that you could tell stories of how God is loving you? Because I was discovering that, and it was overwhelming in the way that it impacted me. And I wanted anybody who could, like, hey, this is
That's the answer. You
yeah,
don't even
this
care
is
what the question
yeah,
is. The
yeah, this
answer
is
is
belovedness,
belovedness,
belovedness, right?
right?
It's so
Right.
foundational and so wild. So I wanna take some of these different categories that we've talked about, and then ask my friend Morgan as an author. Right, here comes 200 and some pages. Here comes a linear progression of chapter one, intro chapter one to the last chapter of becoming a king. Yeah, could you describe just, because your book is wonderful, but and I feel like I was in the audience at times when you were forming, so many of
Right.
these files and folders and chap that would become chapters and verse for becoming a king. Yeah, could you just describe a little bit about that? And is it is it's a part of your masculine journey. You wrote a
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. And I think that, there's this fundamental question, Michael, of how do we get this lived? Right? Eugene Peterson's mentor, Karl Barth, he said, at the end of the day, we have to get it lived. It can't just be ideas. And I
Mm,
love when Peterson says, if it's biblical, then it's practical. And if it's practical, it's biblical. That helps me because
mm,
we're talking about really big ideas. And that's what becoming a king was, this curated, distilled recovery of the path and process of masculine initiation. As I found it, asking question after question in my 30s to recover the ancient path and find it in older, wiser guides, the heart of God expressed through fathers, to say, how do we recover a worldview of a masculine initiation? And how do we get it lived in our ordinary everyday life? And it's every chapter, it's 10 chapters, could have been its own book. And that's the way I wanted to do it, right?
uh-huh.
It's similar to King Me,
Yeah.
right? But at the end of the day, I wanted something that was accessible, that was operational. And that was really the birthplace of Become Good Soil and Become Good Soil podcast, the place we play it out.
Yeah.
But I think what I would want to name in this space is, I'd love to give like a super practical example of what we're talking about. Rubber meets the road,
Yeah.
how you live out becoming a king and how you live out belovedness and spiritual warfare in our maturity in this moment. Okay. So we've been hosting house guests for a week. It was supposed to be 3 days, but a snowstorm and a week, and we've had an 8 college students that graced our presence when my son brought his swim team and relatives, and it's been beautiful and a lot of pouring out and a lot of lack of intimacy with Sherry because we're just going and serving and moving. And I woke up this morning and I did what I do every day. I've learned out of necessity. The first thing I do in my consciousness is declare, God, you are my father and I am your son. I invite you to father me today,
Mhm.
because there's no ordinary days,
Right.
but every day I
Mm,
can do that. The
yeah.
first thing I do is that. And we love making out in the morning. That is one of our happy things. Sherry and I have a lot of sex in the morning, and I wanted to have sex, and she was asleep. And so I'm laying there and so here are the messages, right? And they're subtle, but I've learned to pay attention. One message is, you really need it, right? You actually need it.
Mm,
You're tired, you're vulnerable, you're beaten down a little, you're lacking, and that would fill your tank. Okay, next message. You deserve it. Like, you've been pouring out, you've been busting it. Like, you're entitled to it. And now I could feel the stickiness of these lies that
Yeah.
wanted to attach to my vulnerability to a legitimate need. And what the legitimate need was from God. What I needed was safety, security, soothing, being seen, which Dan Siegel would say are like fundamental ways of expressing secure attachment. Well, God is the source of all that.
Mm.
We have a loving marriage. And if I would have woke her up and said, "Hey, can we make out?" She would have said yes. But what's shifted, Michael, and what I'm proud of on this morning is I'm able to pay attention to these messages
Yeah.
that are looking to attach to my false self
Yeah.
and my need that's legitimate to actually arrange for a life that's self sufficient and use my wife to fill my need. And instead, I stayed in the ache. I let it be valid. I didn't accuse her. I didn't wake her up. And I trusted we will make love in time, but I actually don't need it.
Mm.
What I need is the source. So I'm going to get up and I'm not going to make agreements that she's holding out on me, that my needs don't get met, that I'll never be happy, that I have to be a martyr or I'm a victim. I break all agreements with lies and I agree with the truth that I'm
Mm.
loved. I'm a son. I have everything I need. I have more than enough. God is an endless source to satisfy my legitimate needs. We went through the morning. We recorded a podcast together that ended up being very connecting. We had a couple moments of eye to eye of saying, man, we've had a heavy lift and we're looking forward to reconnecting. And I'm pretty confident based on being empty nesters in our current stage of life is the sun will not go down today without us making out.
Mm.
And if it doesn't, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right? That's the shift. So I just want to
Yeah.
illustrate this. That's the rubber meets the road, and it has everything to
Mhm.
do with belovedness, receiving a spirit of sonship, honoring our core desires, finding them at home in God, and becoming people that bring strength to our wives, not as consumers,
Yeah.
but as true lovers. And all of that's nuanced. And I'm just I risk sharing that because that's today. That's real
Mhm.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. The practical is biblical. The biblical is practical. I
Right.
would say, friends that are listening to this, you probably want to rewind that 4 minutes.
Hmm.
You probably want to rewind that like 3 times because it's a story. It's an example, not a metaphor. This is real of what it looked like in a morning, in the context of visitors, house guests, and marriage, right? And so what I so appreciate, I want to pull away from the story. As our listeners, please go back, rewind 4 minutes, however long it was, and then come back to this point, right? Where what I observe as you share that story, a couple things. One, you have learned an ability, call it a skill, to be awake,
Hmm.
to see what's trafficking, what's moving, what
Yes.
voices, and even deciding that I'm not gonna, not every voice is mine. Not
Right.
every everything that comes up is what does Paul say? It's not all good for me, and yet he weighs these things out. I'm trying to find the words of the practical part of this, Morgan, where I have a sense of what you're speaking about, and it requires me to pay attention. It requires me
Right.
to be an observer of me, while at the same time I'm still on the pillow having these thoughts, and and if we aren't able to get a little bit of distance between the thought and what it
Right.
means, then we will lack discernment, and that's not a real sexy word, discernment, but it's
Right.
powerful a powerful skill or ability for the maturing,
Yes.
for the man or the woman who I didn't see that before. Now I do. Now I can't not see it. I didn't know that. Now I do. So these discoveries of the maturing, Christ follower, believer. I go back to your comment earlier about one of my heroes as well, Dallas Willard. His um, his his insight into the Christ follower and what that was for him. I can read books I have marked up by him and go, "Wait a minute. What are you talking about?" But for and now that they're showing more and more of his videos and his teaching,
Yes.
on YouTube and Instagram, I'm amazed at how not only calm, but how normal
Yes.
this this kind of formation,
Right.
spiritual formation was, and how he speaks. What I want to say, Morgan, and I want you to have a swing at it. Yeah, he doesn't speak as theological and he does, but at times of this is very real to him.
Yes.
Like he's not speaking of a philosophy; he's speaking of a reality, as were you in regards to this morning. So, what? Yeah, what are how about what are some of the things that in that God seems to be moving in a category now, another category of training.
Hmm.
That to me was a story of, I have had experience. I have been trained in some ways that I can see that and not fall prey
Yes.
to um, the false self or the lies that might be either coming at me or coming up. But what are some of the things that more recently, and maybe this season, just as you guys re-enter, it sounds like to me you guys have been um, getting some time and space, knowing that you were going to re-enter at the end of 25.
Right.
Now, here are these early 2026. What are some of the things that you feel like God has been preparing you for, and now is here?
Yeah, Michael, I really appreciate it. There's so many directions we could go, but one of them I sense in my spirit that would be helpful for this moment. Where I find myself in my masculine initiation is at a major inflection point, a transition that's as big as any transition I've ever had as an adult.
Hmm.
And it's this culmination of becoming an empty nester, launching my kids to life, concluding a 26-year apprenticeship with John and Wild at Heart, and transitioning into the second half of life through this Jubilee year. Been my 50th year. I turned 50 in 2 days. And
Oh,
it's this beautiful moment to really take inventory. Where am I with God? And I've taken the risk of stopping everything that's possible to honor endings, to know who I am apart from my gifting. Who
mm,
am I without a microphone in front of me? Who am I without a stage? Who am I when I'm not producing or achieving?
mm,
You don't know until you surrender those things.
mm,
And so I've allowed my world to get as quiet as possible, with this year being defined as much as possible through the traditional practices of silence, solitude, and prayer, meaning silence, solitude, and prayer. And there are some really important things that are transitioning as I notice where we are preparing for the second half of life. And and two things I would name is I'm very sad that I can find very few older guides that are alive that are courageously, intentionally making the transition from king to sage.
mm.
that they're making the transition to become spiritual mothers and fathers that are at their post in a way where they have become the kind of person that says, I have enough. I'm okay. And I'm here as a sacred presence in service of the next generations, that I still have strength. I have momentum that I am relinquishing. I
Mm.
have power, that I have a kingdom that I'm relinquishing in order that I can turn my strength to serve the next generations. And I am going to help my peers become the most rare commodity I know in all the earth in masculinity. And that's wise, mature, elder, sages, guides,
Mm.
and it's very few. And most of it is rooted in an identity crisis. There are many people that are kings that cannot relinquish the kingdom because it creates an existential identity crisis. And
Yeah.
the other piece I would name with it, where I find myself in this transition, Michael, I've spent a lot of time immersing myself in the invitation to Sabbath, to Shabbat,
Hmm.
to architect a response life to God that lives from rest rather than for it. It's profoundly un American. It's profoundly anti Western. And what's surfaced is I have been discipled for 5 decades in marketplace ideology, production consumption cycle up and to the right, more and more, faster and faster. And I also have been discipled in Christianity that has been um, inoculated by American Western consumer churchianity. And it's not an indictment, it's the water that we swim in. And I am in a process of unlearning and divesting. And so I've found myself sitting in new mentors that are expanding my recovery of the biblical model, and guys like Walter Brueggemann with Sabbath as resistance and alternative. John Bergsma wrote Jesus and Jubilee. Eugene Peterson's brilliant work, The Contemplative Pastor. And most of my discipleship in the last 2 years has been rooted in recovering St. Ignatius of Loyola, who was a Spanish warrior that literally was a man that wanted to live and die on the battlefield. And through a wild story of a cannonball to the leg and 60 miles on a gurney, he came to Christ out of his vain glory of wanting to be a warrior for self. And instead, St. Ignatius became a warrior for God, and he raised up Christ centered communities, redemptive outposts of Eden that were rooted in the fundamental belief that everything, good and bad, beautiful and ugly, everything has the potential of calling forth our deeper life with God. And therefore, everything can become a blessing.
Hmm.
And the greatest challenge and trial, and the worst thing that happened to us in our life, had we had the maturity, we would have had the capacity to have prayed for that in order that it would become
Hmm.
the gift
Yeah.
for our maturity. And so what I'm naming some language on the things that are at the edge of my frontier. I'm taking the biggest risks I've ever taken. We're choosing to be volunteers. I don't get paid for my work. I could, and Become Good Soil could write me a paycheck, but we are divesting. We are having a particular attention to the orphans and the widows and the foreigners in the land. We're living a life that's more soulful. It's on a human scale. That is divesting and subversive, apocalyptic, and unbusy, as Peterson would say. And so I'm just naming some
Yeah.
categories that are on my edge as I form into a second half of life warrior shepherd to serve the few. And
Hmm.
it's passionate, but it's vulnerable and it's young in my formation. So I look forward to a conversation 10 years from now on it and see what a decade will form in
Right.
me and in you.
Right. Yeah. I got so many thoughts and reactions, but I think the one that comes to the surface is it's one of the things you've done well for quite a while, for a few decades. Um, the help me, Morgan. It's living day to day, but measuring right
Yeah,
by the
live in the
year, by the
day and
decade,
measure in the decade.
and so that at one point was a suggestion that you that you moved toward, and then it became more and more and more true, and then it became more and more something that I found this. I think this is true, and and
Right.
and and let would you let me test it on you, you know,
Yes.
good soil men, 30 somethings, and this excavation and this depth rather than distance. I've seen you do it. I've watched
Mm,
you do that, and I would add, you said the word identity crisis. I would say to our friends, I hope you'll give me an amen, but you will have several identity crises.
absolutely.
Every transition on the masculine
Absolutely.
journey is an
It's
identity
not a
crisis.
bad thing. It's not a
No,
bad thing.
it's an invitation to who am I now? Who am I in this chapter of my story? And it can't just be universal, right? Who am I to Joshua and Abigail and Sherry and my team? Who am I to you? How do you see me now? And it's not that the other seasons expire. They can become
Right.
part of a trophy case, right? Like right behind you, they become mementos of God's goodness.
Right.
And yet, this is the practical, and this
Right.
is the reality of. Uh, you said it many times. Even we say it all the time. I've never been here before.
Right.
So, God, what do
Right.
you have for me? And where are we going? What are you up to? Right? It was a um, oh, who was the this was back in the Campus Crusade days. The guy experiencing God, who
Black
yes,
Blackaby.
Blackaby.
Henry
Henry,
Blackaby.
yes, and that was one of the first times I started to even not just hear the perspective of that. Where's God working,
Right.
and join Him there. And I remember Brother Lawrence and his whole practicing the presence, and that whole
Right.
idea, like this is not. And one of the things I would just like to wrap with, and want to hear your perspective, because I hear you with the Western and coming into ministry spaces is not a lot different than coming in from the commercial and the other spaces that a man can find himself. Productivity and service, is applauded and rewarded, and it can just become a very very subtle driving force. And so to detach from being productive, right? Versus a pursuit of intimate relationship or deeper friendship. It's yeah, I find that it's something that I'm getting untangled from, even
Yes.
still, but it has a way of just kind of just being close enough to get tangled up again, you know,
Absolutely.
and as you forge into this next season, or hopefully walk. Forge sounds like forceful, but as you move into this next season with rest, and can that continue when the landscape changes, and we're coming out of preparation and now into some way of operation.
Right.
I find that, yeah, here's the next identity crisis. Here's the next
It is.
opportunity to how will I live, knowing what I
Right.
know
Right.
and yet
And
what I
it's
don't.
and it's always a narrow road, right?
Yes,
It's
yes, well
always the
said.
few.
Love it.
And it's always the few of the few. It's always been so. The
Mm,
gospel was always recovered and preserved on the margins,
mm,
not the mainstream. And
mm,
it's fascinating to watch, the desert fathers in third and fourth century.
yeah,
They came onto the scene when Christianity became beneficial for the first time in culture, Before the Desert Fathers, to be a Christian in the early church was to be prepared to be a martyr. You were persecuted.
Mm.
You were the minority. You were the immigrants.
Mm.
You were those lacking power. And then in 3rd and 4th century, it became nominal to be a Christian. There was a way to be a Christian and it be beneficial. And the Desert Fathers said, we must flee. We must flee like those abandoning a ship so that we can become like St. Francis, where we wear the world loosely,
Yeah.
like a loose fitting garment, where it touches us in a few places, but therein lightly. And so this is the challenge. And this is the curiosity of what is the way of the kingdom in this moment, in the world in which we find ourselves. And what's fascinating is we're on the prologue of the greatest change in human history with the AI movement. The change in the rate of change will be unrelenting. And that's not just prediction or prophecy, it's
Right.
what's happening,
Yeah.
right? It's quiet, but it's kind of that COVID beginning of COVID time where you start hearing the murmurs of some stories and it will touch every person in every industry and God is okay. He's
Yeah.
perfectly at ease.
Mm.
He's comfortable with himself, and he's perfectly capable of saving the world that he created. And so the antidote has always been God. And to have people rooted in Christ that aren't scrambling to use the world's systems and just
Mhm.
sanctify it and put Jesus' name on it. You know, Jesus did not use, he did not harness, he didn't leverage the technologies of the day for his ministry.
Mm.
He never wrote anything.
Right. Right.
Isn't that fascinating? He
Fascinating.
could have.
Right.
He could have levered up, and he chose not to.
Mm.
He chose a divestment strategy that was relationally based. The way he could be with the many, he chose the 12. When he could be with the 12, he chose the 3, and his strategy seemed very inefficient and frankly, at the day of Gethsemane, on a human scale, very ineffective. His people, it didn't work, and they abandoned him,
Mm.
seemingly a
Seemingly.
failure,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Was the greatest revolution in human history.
Yeah.
And so the question for our souls is if it's always been narrow and it's always been a few, then right where you are as a man in this place, how is God acting in inviting you to respond to his invitation
Mhm.
to deeper initiation?
Mm.
Because I believe with all my heart, that's the invitation through this podcast,
Yeah.
in these circumstances, in this place. And it's very personal.
Mm.
It's unique and it's also universal. It's always been so. And there's a path,
Yeah.
there's a way, and it's available,
Yeah.
and you're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. You make me think of the deep calling unto deep.
That's
You know,
it.
out of the boat
It's
and
beautiful.
come to me,
Right.
all who are weary, heavy burdened. Come, this invitation. Morgan, I want to make sure that as we wrap up, where your podcast. Can you give a few addresses and a few links? We'll put them on the show notes as well. But how can they explore more of Good Soil, Morgan and Sherry? I'd like for our listeners to be introduced to just a little bit of that as we wrap up. How do they find
Sure.
you for more?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's honoring. And I would say picking up a copy of Becoming a King would be a great next step. And we've curated a podcast now. I think we're in our 15th year for
Hmm.
Become Good Soil. And it was created and birthed out of this invitation to deeper apprenticeship and primarily built around masculine initiation. And now, as we've matured, we see the necessity to speak to initiation of women and couples
Yeah.
and a the engendered experience is central, but speaking to the heart of men and women in that space. So the more recent podcast, we're doing a series on the foundations
Yep.
and our origin story and helping people recover their origin story as it forms their maturing in this moment. So I would say check out the Become Good Soul podcast, read a copy of Becoming a King. But most importantly, don't go at it alone. Find a few people to pose some of these questions, to wrestle with some of these core desires, and to wonder together in risk, in action. Who is God really? Who am I?
Yeah.
What is the story in which we find ourselves? And where are we at the edge of our frontier today as we find ourselves in our masculine initiation? We're being pursued and we are the sons of God, and it is all prologue and the best is yet to come.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Morgan, thank you for spending some time with me on Kings Row, and the beautiful reality of how you've moved in this metaphor across the board. How you happy birthday, bro. I mean, two days and you're 50. I love it. I'm so honored to
Thanks,
invade your
Michael.
space. Birthday month is what my kids like to call it. So hopefully you'll be celebrated really, really well. And it's been an honor to have you here. And not only as you are moving as a king, but how a king moves to help others get to those spaces. I love how you and Sherry are doing that. I couldn't be more proud of you and the ways that you're making ways for
Mm,
other image bearers to find the goodness that has found you. So I love it, bro, and keep
thanks,
man. Thanks for
Michael.
being with us
Thank-
on the King's Row.
Yeah. Really honoring, and I just equally just that I'm deeply moved that you and Robin continue to do the work to become wholehearted and to grow in your union and to allow your work in the world to flow from overflow
Hmm.
from that
Hmm.
deep life of God. You're offering what you're living, and your teaching is aligned with your life. And that's where the anointing is coming from. And so I'm really proud of you, and
Thanks.
I'm really excited for our miles ahead.
Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, friend.
Thanks,
And thank
brother.
you for being with us on the King's Row. We'll see you next time. In the game of checkers, the King's Row refers to the farthest row on the game board from a player's starting position. When a player's man reaches the opponent's King's Row, that man may be crowned or kinged. The concept of King's Row is crucial in the strategy of the game. The more kings a player has, the greater the advantage he has over his adversary.